Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be my July TBR. Now for the month of July, I'm really excited about my TBR. First and foremost, I have some very anticipated, very popular releases where I'm very curious to see my personal opinion on, but I also have a few books from some of my all-time favorite series shuffled in here as well. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. Starting first with just some of the heavy hitting either new releases or just big titles in general that I plan to read for the month of July. The first book that is on my TBR for the month of July is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This book is so popular right now. Not only does it have a 4.7 rating on Goodreads, I physically am unable to find a copy, like a physical copy to read, so I purchased the ebook for the sake of an upcoming video. I've gotten so many comments, DMs about if I plan to read this book. Initially when it was announced, I wasn't going to, but with all the hype, I'm honestly curious. I'm gonna go with an open mind, but we shall see together. This is a romantic fantasy, so it does have a fantasy plot line, but it's definitely apparently very romance forward. It follows our main character who had planned to live sort of a quiet life, living as a scribe and a historian, but she's basically called to enter the trials to become a dragon rider by the general of the army, who also happens to be her mother. Our main character has never planned to enter the military. She feels she's smaller, just not really prepared to take on this really intense competition, especially because the dragons available to become dragon riders are rather limited. The story from there, I think, begins to spiral. I will be honest, I'm not usually a huge fan of dragon fantasy, but there are a few books I have read in the past where this sort of setup is one I've enjoyed. I particularly think of a book called Fireborn that I really liked, very political, dragon focused, some great characters and romance too. I'm curious about this one. I definitely think it's gonna lean more in the like romantasy smut direction, but we shall see together. I'll do a reading vlog and we're just gonna find out. Next book that is on my TBR that is also a new release for the month of July is Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong. I have read some of Chloe Gong's YA releases in the past. I personally found them to just be okay, but I did think her concepts and her worlds were interesting. So when I saw that she was releasing an adult fantasy debut, I was curious and I really wanted to check it out. This is another like fantasy Shakespeare retelling, and honestly, I love the concept of a Shakespeare fantasy retelling, and she's done that in her previous works, and I always thought conceptually those were such cool ideas. This is another trials or game-based fantasy setup. It's also a retelling of Cleopatra and Antony. Follow two perspectives and characters that both enter the games for their own reasons. One is a princess who is trying to get revenge, and the other is a man who is fighting to keep his childhood sweetheart alive after she's been living in a coma. These two people find each other and form an unexpected alliance, and I believe we follow the trials from there. Again, this is one I'm just really curious about. I'm interested to see Chloe Gong's adult fantasy writing. I'm hoping to really like this book, and again, it's one I will keep you posted on. And then lastly, for the newer releases I plan to read on my TBR, I have to give a shout out to Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia, one of my all-time favorite authors. I always pre-order any book that she has coming out. I find her concepts fascinating. I love her writing style. I just feel like honestly she's a genius. This book is very, very strange, and I'm purposely not reading too closely into the synopsis, but I will say the few sort of tagline elements of the synopsis really did sell me, and I'll read them out to y'all now. Silver Nitrate is a meld of Mexican horror movies and Nazi occultism, a dark thriller about the curse that haunts a legendary lost film and awakens one woman's hidden powers. I just feel like this book is going to be a wild ride. I love Silvia Moreno Garcia's writing, as I've already said. Her horror writing is particularly good. I feel like she's so great at creating atmosphere. I just have loved, honestly, every book I've picked up from her, and I've been really anticipating this new release, so it's pre-ordered and I plan to read it this month. Next up, I have a few books in some series I'm really looking to continue. The first is Age of Empire by Michael J. Sullivan. This shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but this is the sixth and final book to the Legends of the First Empire series by this author, one of my new all-time favorite fantasy series. I read the fifth book last month, loved it, and I just want to continue on my momentum with this and wrap it up. Not only because I'm loving it, but I'm also just really excited to jump into Michael J. Sullivan's other works and series and see what I think about those. But I've loved every single second in this world, from the characters to the setting to the landscape to the plot progressions and the pacing. I have just truly enjoyed this series so much. It's bittersweet to finally get to the last book, but I have really high expectations, but also a deep feeling that Michael J. Sullivan is going to deliver. Everything about his plotting has just felt so thought out, so I'm just really anticipating understanding how this whole thing is going to wrap up. This fantasy series is set in an ancient landscape, and we follow a variety of characters from different groups, from humans to elves to dwarves, and we basically see the escalation of not only a very complex conflict, but also the evolution, particularly of human society, from the growth of government to inventions to just society in general. And it's so good. I love just everything about it. The progression of the story has been fantastic, and I just cannot wait to see how it's going to all end. I feel like it's going to make me cry. I've cried many times reading this series. It's just great. So pastoral, so classic. I love every single second of it. Next up, I also have to mention Fool's Quest by Robin Hobb. I took forever to read Fool's Assassin. It took me months to read the first 30% of that book, mostly because I was cherishing it, as this is the final trilogy in Robin Hobb's universe. But eventually I reached a point of no return and I could not put down the first book. I flew through the end and then immediately read the first 30% of this book in a 24-hour period. Needless to say, I am hooked by this final trilogy by Robin Hobb. It's emotional. Like nothing I've ever read before. The amount of crying I've done reading this is honestly not comparable to almost anything else I've ever read. Just the pacing and the emotional journey that we get to experience with Fitz in this series has just been something I'll always cherish. It's obviously incredibly difficult to talk about what this series is about, given that it's the final book to a very, very long fantasy series. We are back in Fitz's life, and like any series centering our main character Fitz, we have a large section of contemplation where we read from Fitz's point of view as he reflects back on his life, his current reality now, and we kind of just get settled into his everyday routine. That very much happens in this book. Fitz is again older than the last time we met him, and the growth and maturity, but also what has consistently stayed the same, has just been a delight to read. This man is constantly in his feels, and I'm constantly in his feels with him. That being said, though, there are some very key changes that happen within this trilogy that I love, including the inclusion of another POV character. And I loved the first one. It was a perfect first book in a trilogy. I flew through the first section of this book because I needed to know what was going to happen next. So obviously I'm going to finish this, I'm pretty sure this month too, just because it's so good. I'm flying through it despite the fact that this is over 700 pages long. Next up, I have The Will of Many by James Islington. This book is one I'm so excited to pick up because I have a feeling I could really, really love it. A new book in a new fantasy series, and I've heard such fantastic things, in particular about the school setting that takes center stage within this book. And if there's one thing that's stayed consistent with me throughout my life, a magic school or military school setting is one that I always love. I love the setting itself for things to sort of be explored. I love the different dynamics and friendships that can form between students. I also just love sitting in on magical curriculum. I just think in general it's such a fun place to exist. That being said, the synopsis of this does sound rather intense. We follow our main character that has gotten accepted into the most prestigious military academy in the Empire. He has basically convinced everyone, including the school proctors, that he is an orphan and he's looking forward to attend this school to basically become the perfect pawn for the Empire. However, though, he has a very secret and separate agenda to that. He not only is looking to have revenge against this Empire, but he's also looking for an ancient and powerful weapon that apparently exists within the school. This just sounds riveting, intense, and very, very political. I can't wait to check it out. I'm really hoping I love it, but I will keep y'all posted. Speaking of books I really hope I love, the next book on my list is The Spear That Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. This book, both in the synopsis and what I've heard about it, just points in all directions of something I feel like I could really love. The setup of this, the writing style, just everything, I just really feel like this could be a contender for one of my favorite books of the year. The fantasy synopsis is a little vague, which I also honestly really enjoy, but basically it's set in an empire where the emperor and his sons rule with an iron fist. And the reason why they're able to have such unchecked power is that they're able to harness the power of the gods that they have trapped and imprisoned within their castle. At the beginning of this book, though, there is some type of conspiracy that results in one of these gods being able to escape, and I believe we follow them on a type of quest and journey throughout this world. I love quest stories. I also love stories centering gods and the complex relationships that can happen between them and humans. The inside map of this book is also just one of the most beautiful things I simply have ever seen. I'm really looking forward to picking this book up. I feel like it's going to have not only a wonderful fantasy plotline, but beautiful and interesting writing too. So this is another one I hope to get to in the month of July. Next up, I have a few sci-fi books that are on my TBR. First is Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie. I feel like I have been putting this book off for way too long. This book is like universally praised, and the author has just recently put out a new sort of companion book that's set in the same world. I'm really curious to finally check this book out. I feel like it's going to have not only a really fascinating like sci-fi setting, but I feel like it's going to be very politically leaning and have some really interesting ideas at play, and I feel like I'm gonna love it, okay? And in the story, we follow our main character, Breck, who is a soldier trapped on an icy planet who is very, very close to completing her mission. Once Breck was a starship with artificial intelligence, linking the consciousness of thousands of people across the galaxy. For though an act of treachery has ripped this all away, and now Breck is trapped in one very fragile human body, and she is on a quest for vengeance. I mean, need I say more? A quest, vengeance, sci-fi setting. I've only heard fantastic things about it. I can't wait to read it. Next up, I also want to read The First Sister by Lyndon A. Lewis. This book sounds so interesting, and I also believe it's a dual perspective story. It's said to explore the powers of technology, colonization, race, and gender, and it's also apparently perfect for fans of James S.A. Corey, who has written one of my favorite sci-fi series, so I also feel like this is going to be rather explosive in plot. The synopsis is really interesting. It tells you a lot, but also the terms are still rather vague. First, we follow our main character, the First Sister, who has no name and no voice. As a priestess of the sisterhood, she basically travels the stars alongside soldiers of Earth and Mars. When her previous captain abandons her, First Sister dreams of freedom. However, though, she is confined to her ship and basically passed over to a new captain. She's ordered to begin to spy on this new captain. Things quickly become much more complicated. We also follow our main character, Leto, who is defeated in combat by none other than the new captain in charge of First Sister. However, though, when Leto discovers that his partner is not only alive still, but also a traitor, they're given an opportunity to basically redeem themselves by tracking them down. However, though, Leto also begins to discover unlikely truths that kind of throw everything into question. I'm so curious about this book. I've heard really interesting things. I love that it appears to be rather character focused, but still sort of tied to these larger political issues that sound very interesting to me. So I truly cannot wait to pick this book up. And the last book that's on my TBR is The Stationery Shop, and I truly need to pick this book up already. I've included this book on so many different TBRs, but I feel like now is the perfect time to finally read it. Last month, I fell down a bit of a historical romance rabbit hole, and while I've sort of moved on from my Regency romance craving, I'm still very much in the mood for romance, particularly one that I feel like is really going to be a hard-hitting romance surrounded by beautiful writing and just stunning characters, and something that probably most likely will break my heart. This book opens up in the 1950s in Tehran, and we're introduced first to our main character Roya, who is a young, idealistic teenager who loves to read, often visits a beautiful stationery shop in her town. There, she is close with the owner, and he, having a keen eye for romance, introduces her to his other favorite customer, Bahman, and they quickly have a budding relationship from there. However, though, on the eve of their marriage, tragedy and revolt kind of strikes the city, and these two characters are separated. Desperately trying to reunite, they fail, and they basically fork off into different directions of their life until many, many years later, they meet each other once again. Everything about this book sounds beautiful and heartbreaking and romantic at the same time. I've heard nothing but stunning things about this. I'm really curious to pick it up, and I feel like it could be a new favorite for sure. Alrighty guys, those are all the books I hope to read in the month of July. Please let me know down below some books you hope to get to this month, as I would love to know, and I will see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye!